So we sent our son off to college, and he came home with schizophrenia.
Now our family's searching for the cure.
But in the meantime, this is how we're functioning.
I want to talk about what can happen. Father, mother, creator. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Functioning. My name is OneGunn. This is my lovely wife, Lovey.
Wendy Cannon Gunn, and thank you for coming back to this very important conversation that we're having today.
Yeah.
Where are we going to go today in this conversation?
Where are we going today? Well, this is part 3 of the initial trilogy we talked about. Mm-hmm. Part 1, remind us. You remember?
Part 1, well, basically the trilogy is based on the diagnosis, right?
The initial.
Yes,
the
it's
initial
very important
onset.
to get that diagnosis right. And we decided that because it was so important, we put it into a 3-part series. The first starting with crazy versus eccentric.
Eccentric, yes.
And we decided that depends on your income, right?
Exactly.
So which one you
Could have
got?
been a 5-part series,
Yeah,
actually, right?
exactly. And then where do we go?
Number 2 was the feeling of an evil presence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is a lot of energy surrounding schizophrenia when you're around someone with the illness, right?
Right, yeah. And today we're going to talk about the 72-hour hold. So
yes.
that, again, people wonder, aren't there programs for people like this? Aren't there meds for people like this? Well, there's a really complex story around getting, again, that diagnosis, getting it right initially. So that's why we want to really spend some time here talking about our experience. And again, to remind everyone, we are not professionals, right? Nope. We, again, if you're scouring the internet looking for professional advice, we are not professionals. We are just here creating space for families who are supporting their family members through this process of schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and one of our scenarios, I should say, is that we use humor to get through this. We've always used it with our son, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yes.
But, going back to today's podcast, imagine, none of us want to be hospitalized. When I think of the hospital, or you go in and your doctor says, good to see you again, I'm like, it's not good to see you. So I don't want to be here. So take that. Imagine a family member, someone you know with schizophrenia, and they are, let's just multiply that by 10, right? Now you're putting them in a confined space. Mm-hmm. They like their space. They like to move around. Now you're putting them where they can't come or go at will, right? Mm-hmm. So hospitalization for any of us would be a concerning scenario, right? Mm-hmm. But imagine someone with schizophrenia, they don't know why they're being hospitalized. Mm-hmm. We've often heard that, no, from our son, there's nothing wrong with me. It took a while. It took a while for the convincing. So, yes, we're going to get into the 72-hour hold. You ready for that?
Right. And, I just want to say that it's interesting you said that, because sometimes they literally don't know why they're being hospitalized, right? Mm-hmm. And then sometimes, as in our case, they kind of come in and out of what you guys may or may not be familiar with, which is the insight, right? That's what they call insight. Do they know there's something wrong with them? And for our son, he knew there was something wrong, but he didn't know what, and he didn't know for sure that these are the people that we're going to help, right? So, and even, and frankly, neither did we, right? We're like, we're just trying. Everybody's, we're kind of afraid. We know that there's something majorly wrong here. And so we find ourselves at the hospital, hoping they can help. So,
and you had a lot of support around it with friends, family, some friends that are professionals, right?
Right.
So that you feel like that helped a lot.
Yeah, well, it got us moving in that direction. But back to this insight thing, some people don't have that at all. So don't actually believe that being at the hospital is what's right for them or good for them. So
or is going to fix anything.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. There was an initial 72-hour hold created, right? Mm-hmm. It's also known as a 5150 or a 5585. And it's a specific code that refers to the involuntary mental health hospitalization. You're being forced to be hospitalized, right? During this hold, a specialized team will evaluate the patients for safety and review the appropriate steps, the next steps for securing stabilization. So let's go into what you need to know. Okay, let's go into a brief history. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready, yeah.
All right, so
this is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's no secret that mental illness has been a complex topic for centuries, right? Even experts long disagreed about how to intervene, right, and what the treatment should be for that condition. Let's go back to ancient times, okay? Some of you may or may not know this, but many cultures perceived mental illness as a sign of extreme religious distress.
Yeah, because you can imagine that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I got that, that feeling of evil. Was that planted, with belief structures around that, or
yeah. And the affected people were believed to be possessed or demonic back in the day. Some assumed their symptoms were simply a product of committing unforgivable sins.
Oh,
can you imagine this?
old
All of
guilt.
this being
You have
a mental illness now. What I did?
cracking
What
up.
I committed unforgivable
You're
sins.
cracking up because you're guilty.
Yeah. So back then, treatment often consisted of religious rituals, corporal punishment, or life-threatening barbaric surgeries. What did we talk about before? Was it the lobotomy?
Yeah,
that
lobotomies.
they used to do to people. Yeah.
Right,
So,
yeah.
now let's go back to the mid 1800s. The U.S. government began building state psychiatric hospitals. Now we call them asylums, of course. They've been known as asylums for a little while. This initiative began what's now known as the institutional inpatient care model. They created a model for this. At the time, it was theorized that such housing would provide safe resources for struggling individuals and relief for their loved ones. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, I had a lot of reaction. I don't know if you guys did, just in hearing that and in reading that. Two things. When you talked about the forced hold, because sometimes people voluntarily go for the 72-hour hold, right? And I think today, and again, we're not professionals, not lawyers, not doctors, but my understanding is that if people exhibit signs that they're going to be harmful to themselves or harmful to others, that they can go in voluntarily and be kind of placed in a hospital for 72 hours. I think so. So I'm curious, about that and how that plays into everything that you're just talking about. Was that always the case that they could go in and get help, or would they always need to be kind of forced in there?
Literally institutionalized, right?
Yeah, that's
so,
interesting.
Yeah, so unfortunately, coming from the 1800s, the actual reality proved to be much different. Inpatient conditions were often brutal.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough staff or funding, and most of the conditions were subpar. And that's just to be kind, to say subpar.
Yeah.
As a result, many patients received awful and even inhumane treatment. Okay, by the mid-1950s, there were extraordinary societal effects or efforts to deinstitutionalize mental illness. At the same time, antipsychotic drugs became more popular for treating mental illness. And a lot of people took these antipsychotic drugs and used them in different ways, right?
Right.
They moved them around, right? Yeah. These medications could provide symptom relief while also honoring more autonomy. Okay, so basically trying to keep it on the DL, right?
Yeah.
They don't want especially family members don't want people to know we have someone with mental illness in our family.
Yeah.
Subsequently, patient care began moving away from inpatient housing to more community-based treatment. Now, with that said, despite the structural changes, psychiatric holds and institutionalized care still exist today. And in our case, thank the heavens, right?
I know, right?
Because we could not have done it alone.
When you were describing that, I was thinking, well, when was the first 72-hour hold? Like in the caveman days, like what did that look like? Did they just kind of roll a rock in front of the cave, and kind of put your family member in there until they got a hold of themselves?
And what was the person like you were trying to hold?
Yeah,
okay?
I mean,
was he the biggest guy in the tribe?
I mean, let's talk about the 72-hour hold. What typically triggers that? Your family member normally is really unstable, and this, so is the family, right? Like it's alarming usually when when you need to trigger that 72-hour hold. So thanks for giving us a little history on that. So,
yeah, and that said, we still have not properly responded to these situations where someone has a call or puts a call in and says that I have a family member acting crazy or they're doing something wrong. So the police respond, right?
Yeah.
Are they qualified to handle these situations?
Yeah, well, now you're talking about a whole nother episode.
I know.
Like I said, this thing gets complicated.
I
really
got a little ahead of myself. Okay, let me finish reading some of this. So with that said, we talked about the 1800s coming into the 1950s. Yeah. With that said, despite the structural changes, psychiatric holds, and I mentioned this, and institutionalized care, they still exist today. However, most treatment tends to be multifaceted and may combine various therapies, which we know one being medications, and of course, community-based support. We did, and we'll talk more about NAMI in the future.
There's that has several heads to it. So that's why we're excited to have this conversation. You guys know, you've been down this road before, so you know much of what we're going to talk about. But for those who don't, we kind of want to take you on our journey, and we appreciate you coming here today and kind of hearing what our family's experience was. So hopefully that can help somebody, or that you could share your experience that may be different than ours. So we want you to come. But when you think about, what our 72-hour hold experience was, we thankfully, I'm from Minnesota, we have an amazing program that helps. They're called the COPE team. They helped get us into the hospital. They helped shepherd us in there, literally like I call them angels on earth. They were just out there hitting the streets with us, helping them, get into the hospital. We got our son situated in the hospital, gave him his blanket, and here we go. We're on the 72-hour hold, right? That's
Did
what
we
they
talk
said.
about the blanket?
I think I left the last session. They're like, as a parent, right? Well, you're talking about bringing your family member into the hospital. Mm-hmm. This is our first time, right, ever doing this. So getting them into the hospital, and you're literally leaving your person that you love in the hospital, and you're both relieved and scared to death, let's face it, right? And so I'm like, what can I do? What should I do? And somebody said, well, bring him a blanket from home, and that'll make him feel more comfortable. So that's what I did.
I knew you were getting advice from somewhere.
Yeah, I was giving advice from other people. So we brought him a blanket, and now here we go.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about just getting him there.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, getting him, the process that he had to go through internally to trust me, to trust the process of getting him to the hospital. I don't know how people do it if you don't have that really tight bond, because even with our tightest of tight bond, he was looking at me like, are you crazy? Why are you taking me to these people? And why are you going to leave me here? And then even once we got into the hospital, they gave him meds, right? Initially, they were
something to stabilize him.
Yeah, something to stabilize him. And he didn't know if he should even take it. And to tell you the truth, neither did I. He was saying like, Mom, should I take the pill? And I'm looking at the doctors. I'm looking at my son, and I'm like, is this like the Matrix where it's going to be the blue? I don't know. So I told him to take the pill, and now he goes from sleeping 1 hour a day, maybe, to now he's knocked out, completely tranquilized. He's sleeping for 20 hours, right? And initially you're happy for him, and you're thinking, good, he's finally able to rest, because that he hasn't been sleeping. But then it's a little alarming, right? Like 20 hours, that's not right. It's, what's going on there? So
coming from a kid who had immense energy, right? Even talking about doing, he used to do handstand push-ups, against the wall, and just full of energy, full of life, full of energy, funny, goofy.
Yeah.
Just typical kid. Typical kid.
And so, this idea that, now he's in the hospital, again, with this blanket from home, and, we're trusting the process of the meds. Meanwhile, the doctors are doing their tests, right? During the 72 hours, the idea is that they're going to test, at least the initial 72 hours, they're testing. They're, doing blood tests. They're doing MRIs, because we don't really know what's going on with our family member.
The blood test, a needle.
Yeah.
That's another episode. I mean, just putting a needle, which none of us like again.
No,
so
right.
now let's multiply that times 10 in our minds, right? This
Yeah.
needle is getting ready to be stuck into you.
Right.
I don't know if you guys do. I don't watch. I look away, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And his exactly, I mean, you nailed his reaction. He's like, why are they taking my blood? What are they doing? You know, just the immense level of distrust that was coming up for him in that process. And again, you know, he'd take the pill, remember, and it would knock him out completely. So now he'd wake up the next day and now he's really alarmed. Like, hey, what happened to me? What did they give me? Now he doesn't want to take the meds anymore. And that was the first time that was, I think, I don't know if I told you in this episode or the last episode, that was really alarming because, you know, he didn't recognize even me. And they were trying to get him to take the pill. And he was like not trusting it and looking at me. And he said to me, which is the most alarming thing as a parent you can ever imagine, to have your own son sitting as close to me as we are right now and having him say, Mom, is that you? And I was like, yeah, it's me, son, you know, and yeah, you should take the pill. You know, it was just, the whole process is, you know, very jarring. And yeah, it was a very difficult time. So, but he did, you know, thankfully, you know, trusting me that he decided to take the pill as, you know, as they did their tests and that. So.
And just for you that have just joined us, to recap, we're talking about, we had an initial trilogy based on the onset when we first noticed schizophrenia happening with our son. And we're into part 3 right now, which is we're talking about the 72-hour hold. But you can imagine, now I just wanted to remind you guys, if you didn't see part 1 or 2, I was not around. So when this first happened, I was in another state. We had pretty much just moved, right?
Yeah.
Here to Phoenix.
Years, yeah.
And I'm trying to take all this in over the phone, trying to imagine, okay, what's going on here? Is this a joke?
Yeah.
But, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about, we start noticing, and this can be normal college stuff, right? But he was losing roommates. To me, when I say an alarming rate, when I went to college, you know, a roommate disappeared after maybe he didn't come back the next year or a full semester, but we're talking about a week or two.
Right,
and next thing you know, he's got another roommate a week or two. So, yeah, we're talking about again, the initial onset of schizophrenia that happened to us.
Yeah,
as,
and getting that
and
diagnosis.
the diagnosis, yes.
Were you going to tell him a little bit about the meds? Because I talked about him taking the meds and the fact that they're a tranquilizer. Did you have some information on?
Well,
the
you
meds and
might
what
be
they
getting a little
are?
ahead, but I wanted
okay.
to talk about the decision, the court case that happened in Minnesota. There was a court case that ruled on involuntarily committing mentally ill individuals, right? Now the case, you mind if I talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the case was Jarvis versus Levine. This was the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So Minnesota Court of Appeals ruled that an involuntarily committed mentally ill patient has the qualified constitutional right to refuse neuroleptic treatment in a non-emergency situation. And that's subject to the exercise of professional judgment by state hospital physicians according to mandatory guidelines. Now, how would you have felt if he had the ability to say, no, I don't want to take any medication?
And actually he did. So interestingly, you know, that was part of the process for us, you know, is that he did. And, you know, they were, you know, trying to, of course, get Mom, you know, to talk to the kid. That's why, you know, they brought me in, like, can you get him to take the meds? And I did, but only for a while. You know, that trust, you know, only lasts for so long. And I actually do respect my son. He during this whole process, he kind of tried to use his own free agency, right? Remember, he went from sleeping 1 hour a day to sleeping 20 hours a day. And now he doesn't trust the process. The pills were kind of too overwhelming, right? They're tranquilizers. So he's got tranquilizers in him. He's in a strange environment. And yeah, he's like, I don't think this is right for me. So,
well, let me go back. So based on Jarvis versus Levine, they can be forced in, they have the option not to take the medication in a non-emergency situation. So were we in a Non or emergency
Well,
situation.
yeah, let's talk
right?
about it. So yeah, that's a good question. Actually, during that 72-hour hold, I don't think it's their instinct. But if somebody may want to come on the program, which we'd love to have you and talk about some of this legalese. But in our particular case, they offered the meds. It was not forced yet. So that's why I was going to tell you that for what happened for him is after the 72-hour hold, and he was, kind of taking the meds, kind of not. Now 72 hours is up. And believe me, that time goes really quickly, right? They're doing tests, but he's not well yet. He's not stable. So as much as a mother, I'm thinking, I don't want him here. Nobody wants their family member in the hospital, but I certainly don't want to take him home. He's not well enough to be home. We don't even really know 100% what's going on.
Right, and you didn't know.
And we didn't know. So they did their tests, and part of it was to bring in the medical team, right? So now what comes before that is the doctors have to make their diagnosis. So they've had him there for 72 hours. He's kind of taken the meds, kind of not. And now we go in to meet the medical team.
Yeah, you're committed. Maybe you're even finally diagnosed with schizophrenia, but you still have rights.
Have rights, yeah. Yeah, that's that's an important part. So and this is Minnesota. And
Minnesota.
And what did your research show? Does this Jarvis only apply to Minnesota, or is it other places?
That's great. That's great information. And if any of you listening, watching, have this information, we'll always tell you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and send us your stories because we want to share your stories. That is one of the biggest reasons for this entire podcast, which is
creating space.
Creating space.
Right.
And is it possible to heal schizophrenia?
Right. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a big one.
I know. That's really their ultimate goal.
That's a big one.
Right. We got to heal this thing.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about kind of how the legalese happen in our particular family. And that is, so after my son was in the hospital, 72-hour hold, now he's at the University of Minnesota, and it's a teaching hospital. So what was great is that, we come into the room and he meets the team of doctors. And as I said, one thing I respect about my son is that he did a pretty good job of maintaining his personal agency during all of this, right? And yes, I consider that to be my son, right? He was like, I'm going to do what I can to take care of myself, even though he was really super vulnerable. And it's true, right? When you're sick, you're very, very vulnerable. So we walk into the room, and a group of 8 or so doctors come into the room with us, and they all have their clipboards, and it's a medical teaching hospital, the clipboard. And so my son just says, hey, before we get the meeting started, I'm going to need my own clipboard. And I agree. And so I started laughing, and yes, they were delightful and gave him his own clipboard, pen and all. So he's taking his own notes. It would have been interesting to see what he was writing down during those notes. But anyway,
and did you save him?
I know, I didn't save him. But yeah, so the reality is that, they make the diagnosis, right? So this is the first time that they said, we believe that you have, our diagnosis is schizophrenia. And we believe that you should take these meds. And we want to keep you past the 72-hour hold now. Now they want to keep him. And now the patient's rights has the ability to say, no, thank you. Which, can you imagine? Who wants to get that diagnosis, right? And now you're not well, you're not processing information, normally. So what does he say? No, thank you. This doesn't apply to me. First of all, I don't believe in any of your diagnosis. And no, I'm not staying here anymore. I don't need your meds. I don't believe in your diagnosis, and I'm ready to leave.
And it sounds like he's being nice and listening, so there's no reason for the Jarvis rule to kick in where he's forced to take anything, especially antipsychotic medications, which are the same ones that make you sleep for 20 hours.
Yeah, he's like, basically, I've seen what you guys have to offer me for the last 3 days, and this doesn't feel right either. So, and now me as the mother of the situation, I'm like, oh no, wait a second, he needs medical attention. And so that is what kind of triggers the I think the Jarvis rule, right? Where a family member I didn't have him committed per se. That's actually where he got legal representation, which I thought was really awesome in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So he got legal representation. We ended up having to do our day in court. And, basically you go into the court and the judge listens to the recommendation of the doctor, the recommendation of the family member, and the representation of the patient. And it was really interesting because, frankly, I don't know anything about this, right? I'm just a new mom at this, and it was really alarming. But one thing that just kept standing out to me in this court hearing was the court-appointed, what are they called again? When you're a court-appointed attorney? They're called... Public defender, yeah. So the public defender kept making a big deal and saying, okay, so I see in this file that you have poly drugs in the system. So he put the doctor up on the stand, and the doctor said, yep, that's what's in the file. And he said, but what's the poly drugs? Poly means more than one, right, doctor? Doctor said, yes. And I'm thinking, where's this guy going with this, right? And he said, well, what's the poly? Well, what more than one drug did you find in the system? And the answer was, well, we didn't. We found marijuana, and that was it. And, well, then you shouldn't have the word poly in the file, correct? And the doctor said, yes, I agree. So you're agreeing that that's a mistake. This lawyer is just going after this doctor about this. What I
you
thought,
had no idea.
I thought was trivial, frankly. I was like, what are we doing here? Does he have to stay in the hospital or not, right? I'm thinking big picture. But the reality is what the public defender knew is that if more than one drug is found in the system, then it throws out the diagnosis, it throws out a lot of the services that
It disqualifies.
It disqualifies you from because then they say that it was brought on, that the schizophrenia was basically brought on by your own whatever, not your other own challenges, and therefore you are not qualified for any.
For state services.
For any state services.
Correct. Social Security, none of that.
None of it. So imagine the impact of that. I just want to stop here for a really second and just imagine the magnitude of that. Because so many people, before they get sick, are doing what they can to take care of themselves, right? And
we call it self-medication.
Yeah,
exactly.
You self-medicate. And you go, okay, if you don't have a family, you don't have advocates, you got your buddies, you're 20, remember? You're 20.
Yeah.
And your buddies go, here, take this will make you feel better, right?
Yeah, and even having advocates, just going back to that word. So I remember some paperwork or some things being handled, the initial process, right? And they're telling you to have this person do this, have them fill out this,
right,
have them send this in.
Yeah.
This person is right on the border of being homeless physically and mentally. So where are they getting all this computer to print stuff out, going online?
Their cell phones.
We are really in a amazing situation, which we'll periodically talk about this, but our son has really adapted to his, I don't want to say adapted, but it didn't happen right away, right? A lot of them will say, what do you mean? I don't have schizophrenia. I'm fine. You're the one that has schizophrenia.
Right.
But he's, we've approached it in such an educational way that, hey, you've got it, but it's all right. We're not disowning you. We're not throwing you out on the street anywhere. We're just, there's certain things that have changed your life.
Right.
And there are things that are going to continue to change your life. Even again, like when we talk about finding a cure. I know I'm just throwing words out there, but finding a cure for schizophrenia. How do you find a cure? It's trial and error. Yeah. What works for this person, I'm not pointing at you, but what may work for this person that has schizophrenia, and I'll go to the other side, may not work for this person that has schizophrenia. So it's really trial and error. And I say that because getting him to try different things it comes a lot from, if he does eventually, it comes a lot from coaching. Mom is
trust in the family,
his heart, his heart and soul, and we're glad that he's trusting enough to say, okay, Mom, or Dad, if you guys want me to try this, as long as it doesn't involve putting a needle in my arm or drinking some nasty liquid, I'll try it. I'll try this. I'll try that. You know. So we're very fortunate, and we know that may not work for you. We're on the upside, right?
Yeah.
Let's just say it. We're on the upside. We've been through a lot.
Yeah.
And these days, this is why we went way back to the beginning. We're seeing a lot of improvements on things, his mental health, his physical health, his mentality, and his his outlook on the world and life. So I didn't mean to go off left field on that, but I'm just saying how I can't wait to start talking about the upside, how things are and where they keep going.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned that. A couple of things, if you don't mind me going back to that diagnosis, right? And kind of how we're able to maintain trust with our son, because he said to me after the doctors told him that, why, and he said, he was just point blank, why are you believing these people, these dumb people with these clipboards? They don't know me, they don't know us. And the reality is that I didn't take their diagnosis. I took my own experience because I've seen this pattern before, and I saw the pattern in my own father. And so therefore, everything that they said only confirmed my own suspicions. And frankly,
we have an episode coming up about him. Oh, never mind. Go ahead.
And because of that, I think that the trust, frankly, so my son was able to absorb that information a lot better than some strangers at the hospital told us, right? So, but at the end of the day, having these angels around us, and we're going to talk about NAMI here in a second, we had this amazing public defender that was, making this stand to make sure that we got services and programs. Mm-hmm. We had these angels, by the way, at the University of Minnesota. Social workers were working behind the scenes this whole time. Now, again, I'm a new parent at this. I have no idea what's in store and what's ahead for me, right? Mm-hmm. To leave this hospital with a son that has schizophrenia. They knew, though, and they were doing the work to make sure that I got the services that we needed, that we got the diagnosis that we needed, right? So that he had the services and didn't end up homeless. And you can see how so easily they just end up homeless. If you don't have a family member that gets it, if you don't have the proper diagnosis, I mean, we're really lucky, but it did start with that initial diagnosis and having these angels around us.
And just getting him there. Like I said, I was not there. So I mean, if anybody could move a mountain, it's Lovey right here, but to move this mountain, and he was so staunch in his beliefs. He was so staunch in, what is this schizophrenia? Right. What are you talking about? Why are we
trusting these people? Why do you? He calls them the hospital people. Mom, why would you trust hospital people?
I call them the hospital people. That's a whole nother story.
They're hospital people.
That isn't a mental illness word.
You mean a doctor and a nurse?
I got to go see one of these hospital people is not the words you want coming out of your mouth. Okay.
But at the end of the day, again, so that was our experience, and with a proper diagnosis, we were given a NAMI pamphlet and sent out of the hospital after he got stable, and that was pretty. And that's the good news, right, for us. And that is why I think to this day we're able to, see a lot of the upside, that in healing.
And what does, we're going to put it up on the screen, but what does NAMI stand for?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So that's the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And NAMI Minnesota, again, I've met a lot of angels along the way, and these guys are advocating. They are doing so much work. Paul Wellstone's family did a lot of work to make sure that Minnesota has the services that we need. And NAMI is a great support source, especially for if you're early in this process. Honey Babe mentioned that we talk about this in humor format, and the truth is that we've had, the comedic timing of our tragedy. Plus time allows us to laugh now, but that might not be the case for you. And it wasn't for us either. Believe me, when we walked out of the hospital with the NAMI I'm like, who are these people? Where do we get help? And they were the angels. And so they've got amazing support groups. They have family to family classes. There's so much you can learn about. They have peer support groups. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you're new to this process, and even if you've had some time, maybe that you would do a support group.
Yes.
For families, and believe me, we've gone down all of those angles with NAMI. They're amazing, and but by no means were we finished, even with that diagnosis, and
just the beginning.
Yeah,
right?
but in after leaving there and going through NAMI, I learned how valuable that early diagnosis was, and how so many of my friends in the process who I've met through NAMI, their family members are on the street without a diagnosis because they didn't have a public defender picking apart the language about poly drugs or not, or they didn't have social workers in their hospitals pushing forth the proper paperwork for Social Security. So no, they don't qualify for these programs, or they may have had a legal problem in their early life, and
or they have poly drugs in their system.
And now, they're literally insane and on the street, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and we are, 20 years into this now?
20? Is it?
Yeah, it's we've got a birthday coming up next month, so we're going to be right around 20 years into this, and 20 years of NAMI. If we didn't mention it, that started right off, right? That's what the initial onset was, the initial hospitalization. Yeah. So that's where we discovered NAMI. And to this day, we still talk about him going into certain groups, see what they're talking about, what's the latest. I had when I say had asthma, I've literally... I feel like I've healed myself. They say asthma can just go dormant, but in any case, I'm not on asthma medication anymore. And it was a while ago. This was probably when he was not as cognitive as he is, talking about our son, as cognitive as he is right now. But I'd say about 10, 12 years ago, I said, and it took me about 7 years of research to get off of all asthma medication. But about 7, 8 years ago, and I was just getting into that, I said, let's make a pact. I'll research some natural, holistic remedies for me, and then you do the same for schizophrenia. Now, I'm saying this to a person that has schizophrenia. He's not a big, he's not going to watch TV to find out anything. But he does read a lot. He's into his music. He listens to a lot of music, but he wasn't doing the research. I say that because he was supposed to be online with his computer doing his research, and he never did. And we were working with him on, we would find out what can work. Is it, is it ashwagandha, or is it something else? We're looking for all these, anything outside of taking this medication that was literally making him sleep forever. Yeah. So I say that whole story because now, I'd say based on the last year or two, we see him doing research. We'll talk about him writing a book and all that later because he does have some smarts. Okay, he's not just walking around in the daze, but now he's starting to do his research, and now he's starting to go and talk to people about some of the NAMI meetings. So I say that because there could be a little light at the end of the rainbow for some of you, if not all of you. But we won't know that unless you like, subscribe, and send us your stories and comment. In the comment sections, comment on our podcast. What would you like to hear about? What would you like us to research?
Yeah, and what can you share with the community about, getting diagnosis? We talk about it from the Minnesota standpoint, but, let's share, what has worked for you in your community so that people have, have those support structures, locally for you. So, the next episode, I think it would be a good one to talk about some of the holistic journeys that we've been on to heal him, which is ultimately healed us too.
Oh yeah.
So thank you for everyone for joining today. Thank you for helping host us again. And let's see, we'll continue to look for the cure for schizophrenia.
Of course.
But in the meantime,
this is how we're functioning. Hey guys, thank you for joining us again. We'll see you next time on Functioning. Have a great rest of your day.